Welcome to our podcast, Moving the Needle on Wicked Problems. Today we are continuing our mini-series on racism in Canada. We want to dive deep into how racism affects our lives from a multidimensional lens. For this episode, we will be looking at racism in sports. This theme is all the more topical today, as we just recently heard about two well-documented incidences of racism in hockey. Two Black players on two separate occasions were taunted with racist words and actions. Sadly, these we know are not isolated incidences. Players who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color have faced racism in all sports, from hockey to swimming to soccer to gymnastics. Players, teams, and leagues have called this out and have raised their voice, saying, "Stop, enough is enough." But it still continues to happen.
Yeah, absolutely, Senator. It's really troubling and saddening to hear these stories, but, realistically and unfortunately, they're not uncommon. A former colleague of ours coached minor hockey for many years in Indigenous communities, and they would travel to games and tournaments and be racially abused by the players and spectators who are often the parents of the kids of the opposing teams. Officials on the ice wouldn't do anything, and the league wouldn't do anything. So they just basically had to deal with this on a game-by-game basis. And there's even a recent story in PEI where there was a Black teen that complained about on social media about local hockey association not doing enough to deal with racist abuse that he was suffering. But guess who got suspended? The player got suspended for breaking the social media rules. So, this is something that everyone is, having to deal with, but nothing seems to be changing the attitudes of everyone. So we're going to look into this, delve into it, look at this in the multifaceted way that it is. So let's get to the interview.
Welcome. Today, we are going to continue our mini-series on racism, and we're going to focus on sport. And to help us peel this onion with many layers, we are speaking with Rosey Edeh. Rosey is a 3-time Olympian, Commonwealth Games medalist, and a member of the Quebec Sport Hall of Fame, who has spent the last decade as a TV personality. We're also joined by Dr. Sheema Khan, who is a columnist for the Globe and Mail newspaper and the author of the book, Hockey and Hijab, Reflections of a Canadian Muslim Woman. Both are seasoned professionals, and they will help us move this needle on this particularly troublesome and wicked problem. So I'm very tempted to start off with the first question on the recent happenings that we all know about the racist incidents and taunts focused on two Black players. But I'm going to stay true to my script and help the audience get to understand Rosey and Sheema's pathway a little better. So my first question is, what drove you to be in sports, either as an athlete, Rosey, or you, Sheema, as a writer thinking and writing about sports? What was the motivational factor here?
You want to go first?
Go ahead, Rosey.
Okay. So for me, and first of all, just thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this podcast. What a dynamic discussion I know it's going to be. And unfortunately, it's very timely. Here we are, 2022. Talking about racism in sport. And oh yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. You would think by 2022, we're like, what? Huh? What do you mean? But no, it's the exact opposite. It's still loaded and there's so much to discuss. And yeah, we're talking about athletes who are in their 20s who have to deal with racism. You would have thought in 2022 that, an athlete who was growing up in the 90s and the uh-ohs would be like, what do you mean? That's an old-timey thing. It's not, and it's unfortunate. Sport is a place that it's supposed to be a safe space. It's supposed to be a place that unifies. And you're talking about teams, you're talking about giving it your 100% effort, and sportsmanlike conduct means that people come together in a spirit of good competition, great spirits. And that's usually what happens. You give it your all, blood, sweat, and tears, years of training, so that you can see how far you can push yourself. That's what sport's all about. But unfortunately, the ugly head of racism continues to rear its head. I got into sport because my mother said, find something to do after school, stay out of trouble. So I couldn't make the basketball team. I tried in high school and I just wasn't good enough. Track is a sport that welcomes everyone. There, track and field covers running, jumping, throwing, so there's power, there's speed, there's strength, there's endurance. So I got into that because you didn't really have to try out. You just had to show up and show up to practice. And so you're on the team.
There you go.
So yeah, I got into sport because of that camaraderie. And yep, my mom said, do something after school. And so I found track.
Oh, wise mom. Now, Sheema, you come at this differently. You're,
Right.
I think, a hockey mom, I think a hockey player. I'm not quite sure. So tell us about hijab and hockey and how you came to
Right.
this.
Well, I started wearing hijab I think at the age of about 26 or 27. But before that, I was active after and before, but I got into sports. We came to Montreal from India when I was about 4. And right away, my parents put me into ski lessons, and I hated them because I wasn't good at it, but I was good at other sports. And so, and at that time we didn't have the, community leagues that you have now, right? But I got into tennis. I actually started training with the Quebec tennis team at one point. I played on practically every single high school team. Except for gymnastics, which I was lousy at. And in fact, when I graduated, I was a female high school athlete of my class. And then soccer, and I got accredited the Canadian Soccer Association. And I always felt welcome, included in whatever sports I played. It was the team aspect that Rosey spoke about, and it was fun, and I really liked it. As time went on, I grew more serious about school because I had to make a decision in terms of time commitment. But recreationally, I played tennis, I played soccer, a little bit of hockey on the side. When I went to Harvard for grad school, they had no intramural hockey for women. Mm-hmm. So a teetotaling connect started intramural women's hockey at Harvard. I just found things very welcoming and people, really pursuing in the best of spirits. I didn't get to a competitive level as Rosey did. So I've seen the fun side of sports, right? And then later on, I became a hockey mom, a soccer mom, and parents have been great. And maybe because I've sort of kept away from the nitty gritty, I haven't really examined or been subject to the ugliness that I know exists. Right? So that's where I come from. And now I'm an observer. I'm a fan, and like everyone else, I was just appalled to read about what happened in the AHL and the East Coast Hockey League. But I think Rosey touched on it briefly, but because I was thinking, when Obama was elected, I think we all thought, what, new era. But I think that just set off a backlash that simmered and just exploded with Trump, and people believe they have the license now to spew, things, whether it's speech or through action, that I think wasn't acceptable 8-10 years ago, but now.
So let's dive into the hot topic of the day. I know that racism exists in almost every slice and dice of our life, but I have also observed that there are significant numbers of players, whether they're in hockey or basketball or football or soccer, definitely, where there's, it does look like the world is represented there. The world is playing in this field. And so I was frankly, maybe I'm naive, but I was shocked at the very open expression of racism experienced by the two Black players on two different ice hockey fields and on two different occasions. Were you shocked?
Well, I was kind of surprised that these were players who were doing it in such open fashion, because in the past it's been fans, right? In Quebec, I forget the name of the young player in Quebec, where, I mean, he was just subject to horrible taunts while he was in the penalty box, and his family was, had to be escorted out. Or you could have cases of, fans throwing banana peels onto the ice, or it's usually like fans. For me, this is the first time I've actually heard of players on the ice openly taunting with overt racist acts. Like that I think is a different level. That's the first time I've sort of seen it at that, player on player.
Rosey, were you shocked?
No, I'm not shocked. But as to what Sheema just said, it is to note that it was an athlete who made that taunting gesture. But Bernie Saunders, a former NHLer, played for the Quebec Nordiques. He played in the 80s. He wrote a book called Shutout: The Game That Did Not Love Me Back. He's a Black player. And on, I think it's the first page, maybe the second page, he writes about being taunted on the ice the same way in which Jordan Subban was taunted on the ice just the other day. 20, 30 years ago, it happened to him. He was taunted by another player. And he talked about his love of hockey, but how players, coaches, folks in the stands all taunted him and threw out racial epithets, and he had to deal with that throughout his entire career. And it was so difficult and disappointing and disheartening, and it diminished his sense of self and even his emotional state. He left the sport and went into the corporate world.
Oh, wow.
But what can I say? It's sad, but no, it's not surprising. I mean, he wrote about this. Bernie Saunders wrote about this in his book, and then the first or second page, he writes about being taunted with these awful gestures on the ice by another player, and not just by an opponent who's trying to get at him and maybe get into his head so they can win. But he talks about players on his own team not coming to his defense, in fact, taunting him in the locker room. So I'm disappointed. I'm very disappointed. And I know that the individual who made those gestures recently said that's not what he meant. And so I know that he has been since removed from the team. And I'm not going to mention his name. I'll just talk about Jordan Subban, who's the younger brother of PK Subban, incredible hockey player, and I loved how PK and his whole family and so many thousands and thousands of people came to Jordan's side and backed him up. And I think that that's what we need to do. We need to show that there is no room for that. I don't know what this person meant to do with those gestures, but I know that Jordan jumped on that right away and took it as a racial taunt, and he settled it on the ice. And now it needs to be known. Here we are, 2022. Can you imagine, Senator, that we're talking about? We need to let people know that that's not acceptable. Really? But apparently we do.
Okay, so I actually get that, but it has to be more than words. And so I get to systemic solutions. Yeah. I'm surprised that the leagues themselves and the management, and Sheema, maybe you'd comment on this, that the management has not developed rules of conduct, clearly articulated penalties, both for players and fans, because this is, intolerable, what Rosey has described. Do you know of any sport that has actually taken this to heart and say, this is what we will do in the team, with the fans, on the field, if racism is expressed one way or the other. And you know, there's always a question, you know, what was the intent behind it? And so you have to have procedures around that. But I know that in many parts of the business world, there are clearly articulated codes of conduct, and there are penalties. Now, whether these are followed or not, I don't know. But I'm asking you, Sheema, I mean, if this is a systemic problem, we need a systemic solution. So what is the systemic solution?
Well, what I find, I mean, I follow sports as a fan, and I don't sort of follow the management level, but I find a lot of it is reactive, right? So this is what you saw with what happened in these minor hockey leagues in the ECHL. They you know, the player was let go. The statements came out from management, and the same thing that happened in Quebec about 3 years ago. You know, it's always reactive. You know, and maybe that's just hockey. I mean, hockey is, I think, of all the sports that I follow, I think hockey is probably, you know, whether it's baseball, basketball, football, I think hockey is the farthest behind, to be honest. And you can see that in the makeup of the player, right? In the makeup of you know, management, players, whatever. It's predominantly a white sport, right? It's changing slowly, but that's the reality. And I think I would hope the NHL could learn perhaps from more, maybe the NBA. You know, I find perhaps of all the professional sports leagues, I think the NBA is probably the most, quote, progressive, if that's a word, you know, lack for a better term. Could it do better? For sure. I think these sports leagues have to learn from the best of corporate culture. I think, you know, import best practices from you know, other places, such as corporations, which do emphasize, they don't just say it, they mean it, you know, and you can see it in their work culture and their corporate culture. And so there has to be willingness too. When I look at the NHL, I see Gary Bettman, and I'll be frank, I have like no hope in him. I mean, he's there to make money for the owners, and that's his main thing. And if it means damage control to keep the, you know, but it's not really, he's not really interested in a cultural change of the league. So I'm somewhat pessimistic. And I think if there is one place where there'll be pressure, it'll be from the fans, if they insist on it, though.
Okay. The customer is king.
Yes.
Always. Okay.
But they don't realize, I don't think fans realize that we are. So.
Rosey, I'm curious, do you have any, you know, sort of systemic solutions that you can think would be there, and you know, on the sort of more professional leagues as well? And after you maybe jump in there, I wouldn't mind talking a little bit about minor leagues, or like kids growing up in the leagues and the things that they face in hockey and other sports. So if you have any thoughts on breaking down the systemic barriers as well.
Yeah, it would be a huge task. There's no doubt about it. And like Sheema says, what do the fans want? And what are the fans looking for? And then on top of that, the owners, if we're talking about pro sport, need to include those who may not look like them into their fold for whether it's consultation, whether it's diversity training. I don't think that it should be left upon those Black, brown, and people of color to teach, or to solely teach white players, if you will, white owners, if you will, about the downside of racism and systemic racism. I think that you have to engage white folk in that conversation as well, but it will go back, and it's going to take a while, but you got to go back to the Pee Wee League. You've got to go way back to the young kids growing up in the league, because when you think about this incident that happened in the two hockey incidents in the minor hockey league, these are not 40-year-old players. they're in their 20s. And so they're quite young, and yet there is obviously some cognitive dissonance. There's some cut with there's a distance here between one player and another, between what's acceptable, what isn't, what is considered offensive and what isn't. There's obviously people out there who go, I didn't really, that's not what I meant to do, and I'm not of that. But yet another player took it like that. So obviously there's some issues that need to be addressed, and you're going to have to start really young. And to Sheema's point, you know, a lot of the big time owners may not be really interested in starting that early, but you know, money can go a long way, and you can forward some of that money to some of the minor leagues and the younger leagues, and it's about teaching and about training and about talking and discussing, and open discourse really does help. But you need white folks to talk about the negative impact of racism too. They need to be a part of the conversation. You can't just be talking to white people saying, this is not nice, this hurt my feelings. And it's like, okay, because then it becomes othered. And then many people who are, manifesting those racist taunts think, well, race is something other. It's not of me. It's, it pertains to Black people, people of color. And no, we're all, again, this is sport. So we're all in there. We're all on the ice. So we're all in this together. You offend me, then you offend everybody. That's what has to be taught.
And I'm curious about that because, I coach hockey. I coach my son's team. I'm a part of an organization called Hockey Without Borders. And so, I know lots of hockey people and different things like that. What saddens me, however, is there's plenty of stories, not only of professional leagues, but of minor hockey leagues. These are, teenagers or younger, of racist taunts that are happening. A colleague that worked with the senator and I, he's worked in Indigenous communities coaching hockey there, and everywhere they would go around playing in sport tournaments and games, they would have racist taunts, not only by the fans, which actually are the parents of the players, but also by the players. And there was, a recent incident in PEI where a Black player was suspended for complaining on social media that the incident, the abuse that he had faced, was not dealt with appropriately, and he was suspended for breaking their social policy, the guidelines. So I'm just wondering, I think, hockey maybe hopefully is a bit of an outlier, but this does, exist in other sports, and in soccer in particular, where, they close stadiums to fans because there's racist taunts to the players, and they're actually taking the knee all the time, in the English Premier League because of, trying to show solidarity against racism. So how can we build those systems and programs in that young age that we can really deal with these issues before they become professional players and before it becomes the spotlight, that we've seen in the last 2 days? Sheema, do you have a comment? And then maybe Rosey afterwards?
Well, I think you touched on something important, the parents, right? You can have the best training sessions for the kids. I think the same thing has to be given to the parents, because, kids are going to look up to the adults around them. And if they see the adults around them yelling profanities and horrible words, they're gonna take that as a license that it's okay. So I agree, these programs, yes, let's have programs of diversity and inclusion for the young folk. You also have to give it to the parents of these players. I think if anything, they need it more than the young ones. I don't know what happens to parents once they get inside that hockey rink, or they come to that soccer field, or it's like a switch, something happens, and that has to be dealt with more than anything, I find. I mean, as a soccer mom, more than a hockey mom, I felt like we've got to have programs for parents, just to, not just about racism, but like, you're not living vicariously through your kid. Like, it's just something that happens to parents, not all of them, but enough to make it ugly. So.
Yeah, I would have to echo what Sheema is saying. You really have to, You have to start with the parents, and there has to be, although I know that people's eyes will glaze over, but there has to be, in order for your child to enter this league, parents have to take X amount of hours of this training. It's a training module. It's available on computer. You have to, maybe you don't have to sit in a classroom, but you got to upload it. And then we got to make sure that you've taken X amount of hours of these classes. And if you don't, then your child can't play. And then it has to be this a very comprehensive course. And it sounds kind of nuts, right? Like, what do you mean you have to take a course on how and to learn that, these words are not acceptable and this gesture is very, very racist and offensive to people? But believe it or not, and the evidence is there, it is necessary. And all parents need to take it. All parents need to take it in order for the kids to participate. And then the kids need to have the talk. You've probably heard about Black parents who give their young boys the talk when they hit a certain age. It's like, oh boy, okay, you're not cute anymore. You're turning into a man. So now we have to sit down and have the talk about why you can't just play cops and robbers with your friends with a toy gun. Can't do that, because you could, that toy gun could be seen as an actual weapon in the eyes of certain authority figures. And because even though you're only 12, but some may think that you're 18. Because that's just how you are construed in society in general. So we have that talk with our boys. So we have to have that talk with all kids. We have to have the talk about, you know what? Racism is a very, very insipid thing. It's horrendous for the entire society. We all fail. We all lose when somebody commits a racist act. Really? Yeah, even me, even you. And it has to be taught at a very young age. And I think that that's where there's a problem with the parents, because they do sort of a little bit of Jekyll and Mr. Hyde when they get on the rink or they're watching their kids play. But the kids need to be informed. And if a 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old Black boy has to have that talk and has to learn about the harsh realities of the way in which he's seen in society, then a 4, 5, 6-year-old, all other kids need to have that talk about the harshness of racism and just say, we don't do that here. We are a family. We are a society. We reject it, all of us. And then I think that you'll start to develop these individuals who are more aware, empathetic, and they can still be fierce competitors and incredible athletes, but just not with racist tendencies.
So I have two questions. Both, as you were talking, Rosey, they occurred to me. We've talked a lot about the sports where men and young boys are dominant, hockey, basketball. I want to talk about girls. And my question is to Sheema, because she did write Hockey and Hijab, and I imagine little girls in hijab playing hockey, which I think is a wonderful picture. Do you think racism in sport exists differently in female leagues, whether they are junior leagues or the opposite? I'm really not a sport expert, so I don't even have the language, but I know there are junior and senior leagues. Or is this expressed more harshly in those sports where a certain amount of violence seems to be not simply tolerated, but actively sort of part of the context?
Well, I'm sure. Have you seen the film Bend It Like Beckham? Do you remember that film?
Yeah, love that movie.
Isn't that great? So I forget the name of the heroine, but in the film it shows her experiencing racist taunts on the field by other players, right? And so that exists. I mean, people are people, male or female. There are racist tendencies amongst women just as there are amongst men. Maybe it's expressed differently, I don't know, but it still hurts nonetheless, right? It still hurts. And sometimes in sports, the intent is to hurt, is to rile up your opponent, is to, it's competition, any advantage you can get. So I would say, I mean, again, I'm not involved in sports to the extent that Rosey is, so she could probably speak to it much better. I was just reading before this podcast, I was reading about Ibtihaj Muhammad, the fencer for the U.S. Olympic team, who was the first one to compete wearing her hijab. And in her, she won a medal for the, as being as part of the team. But in her memoir, she writes about, what she endured, the taunts, the racism, like going, training as a fencer, going up all the way through college, to the profession, even amongst her teammates. So it's there, regardless, I think, if you're female or male. But I think Rosey can probably speak more to that as well.
Yeah.
So
thanks,
Rosey,
Sheema.
just throw in another question so you
Sure.
can package them all together. Let's stay with girls, but also let's talk about team sports versus sports where, like you're a track champion, so you run by yourself, and I'm sure there are team elements, but it's not quite like playing in a hockey league or a basketball league. So would you comment on those? One, is this a male-dominated expression or not? And what about team versus individual?
Sure. Well, I don't want to get too long on this answer, but I've got a lot of examples. I'll just give you my personal example. Growing up in Montreal, running track, the only indoor track available to us to train on was Claude Robillard. So that's where I trained inside in the winter time. And the way that it's set up is you need a membership card in order to enter. And so I would train in the States. When I come back and visit my family, I would train at Claude Robillard. I'd always have my card handy. You go in, there are two entrances. Many times the entrances are supposed to be, there's supposed to be somebody there to check your card, but many times you go in, there's no one there. I don't know, maybe they're on a smoke break. I have no idea. So I would just walk in and I'd have my card in hand, but there's nobody there. So you just walk into the track and I'd start my warm up. Well, inevitably they would come back and sit down at their desk and then just kind of survey the track and go, I didn't see her there before, and literally run up to me. And I'm not training. It's not like I'm training and I'm running super fast. So whoa, there's that fast girl. Let me just check her out. I was just jogging. I would be stopped inevitably every single time I would go start my little warm up by myself because I'm the only Black girl. So it's easy to notice, oh, wait a minute. And I would always be stopped midway through my warm-up and have to go back, find my card to present to this gentleman to prove that I can train here, as a Canadian record holder, by the way. And many times people would come in after me, white people would come in after me, and they'd never stop them. They never stopped the other people who came in after me who also didn't show their card because the person wasn't at the desk. So this is that kind of systemic racism that we're talking about. It's that otherness that they make you feel. It diminishes you. It excludes you, it humiliates you. And this has nothing to do with, track and field, the governing body of track and field itself. It has to do with, the individual going, hey, I didn't see her. I need to check her card. But never having that same instinct when, never looking and surveying for somebody who looks like them, that they did not check the card. So, and to them, they're like, I'm just doing my job. To me, I know I'm being singled out. So that's one thing. Okay. Another thing, and this is very recent. So we're talking late last year. You probably remember this in Tokyo, the Olympic Games, the world governing body for swimming. They prohibited these swim caps for women with natural thick hair. Now, well, it's not just in the Black community. The way that they grade hairs, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. And so 4 and 4C is very thick curly hair. Mine's like about a 4B. And it's throughout the beauty industry. There's these grades of hair. And when you have 4C hair, 4B hair, it's very thick. We don't have straight hair. Our hair is naturally curly. And so to fit it all in a cap, a regular cap, can't. You'd rip half your hair out trying to get it into a regular cap. Wow. So these individuals created these incredible swim caps that are bigger, that can house all that thick hair, so you don't have to cut it all off to go swimming. And the governing body said they prohibited the use of the caps, and they said, and I quote, that the caps do not, quote, follow the natural form of the head. So that's saying that those with hair like mine have an unnaturally shaped head. That's how I take it. And that is actual fact. Go ahead and take a look. Tokyo Olympic Games. Now, another example, Australian Basketball Australia. For a moment, they prohibited braids in the league. And they said, because loose braids could whip around and injure a player. And so they said, no, you are only allowed to wear braids if they are tied up or worn in a bun. Now, if that isn't trying to control the body and the individual, I don't know what is. And as far as I know, there's no regulation for people with straight hair. They are not regulated and told that they must tie their hair up in a bun. They can wear a ponytail and let the ponytail whip around. But if you had braids, they said no. But anyhow, Tiffany Mitchell, she cried foul. She's on one of the Australian. She's on the Australian Melbourne Boomers. She cried foul. So a few weeks later, they went, okay, you can have braids. But it's like singling out braids, which is a way in which mainly Black women wear their hair and have done so. It's not like it's just a fad. We just last week said, oh, we want to wear braids. It's a cultural, it's a part of our cultural identity. It's a way in which that we keep our hair. And the Basketball Australia at one point said, nope, you can't wear braids. And if you do wear braids, you have to tie it up and you have to wear it this way because we said so. Anyway, those are examples, team sports and then individual sports. So, and you know what would help? If you had a bit more diversity on their governing boards. I bet you $1 million if you had a Black person on the governing board, they'd be like, wait a minute. What are you saying? What are you saying? And then they would help them see things from a different perspective. I'm not saying that they're terrible and that they are racist to the core and they want to eliminate those who do not look like them, but it shows the ignorance. The ignorance is just, it's like colossal. And I think if you had some people who are from a bit of a different background, it could add a different perspective. So those are the kind of things that, that could discourage a young Black girl who goes, oh, the only way I could wear my hair, playing basketball and sweating, I need braids. And then you hear, oh, Australian basketball said no braids. What? Oh, okay. I don't know. Right. And where we want women to participate in sport. The dropout rate for girls in sport, by the time they reach high school, it's like 50%. They're like, forget it, sport. We should be doing everything that we can. We, meaning governing bodies of sport associations, we should be doing everything in our power to encourage girls to stay and to get involved in sport. And by telling them that no, this swim cap does not follow the natural curvature of your head, so you can't wear that. So that means you got to cut your hair off, or you can't wear braids. Okay, yes, they turned around and changed it, but it shows you. I just wanted to give you examples of that exclusion, of that otherness, of how it diminishes and can humiliate those who don't look like the dominant culture.
So those are very pertinent examples. And I'm going to turn to Sheema about hijab and sports. What do you know about how is it accepted, or were there rules against the hijab in hockey and other sports? I kind of think as a Canadian that must be old history, but I'm not sure now. But after hearing this, I'm not sure. You tell me.
Well, I mean, the flashpoint for hijab in sports has been, not surprisingly, Quebec. So you had, 10 years ago, tournament out in the West Island, a team from Nepean here in Ottawa, a girls team. They had a match and, they played a couple of games, and then one of the games, the referee says, they had a player who wore the hijab, and he said to her, you can't play with that on the field. It's against FIFA rules. And like, what? And they said, no, you can't. So instead of her staying off the field, her teammates said, well, if she doesn't play, we don't play. And the parents supported that if she doesn't play, we're not. and they left. They left the tournament, and like that to me is so powerful, right?
That is,
and then a couple years later, I know we're talking about hijab, but the same thing happened with a young Sikh boy who was wearing a turban, and same thing. And until FIFA came out and clarified and said, look, it's as long as it satisfied certain safety conditions, of course, fine. So in Canada, when you talk about hijab, it's been on the soccer field and it's been in Quebec. I don't know. I played in a women's league for like 10 years, right? And never any problem, never any issues. At the end of the game, my teammates had a beer and I had Dr. Pepper because that's what I like. So it's happened a couple of times that I know of. Hockey's great because you just put the helmet over your hijab. There's no issue. But other sports, I don't think I've come across that as much.
Okay. So there are points of light. I mean, I'm always I love the story about the team walking off. I love that because that tells you the power of team and the power of many over the power of one. Exactly. So here's my next question, and it's about Colin Kaepernick. Am I pronouncing his name right? And his taking the knee. And he paid a heavy penalty for that and still continues to pay that penalty. And many people have said that what did that get anyone? It was a performative gesture. Tell me what you think about that.
Well, I thought it was incredibly brave. And if anything, it was not performative. I mean, it set off a movement. It set off a movement. It brought awareness to a situation that many did not know about, and his actions have been followed. It's not like they've disappeared. As much as Trump tried to people, it resonated. What he did resonated, and it resonates to this day. And it's spread to other sports. You see it across the pond with the English Premier League that Paul mentioned, players taking the knees. So it was a very powerful, courageous gesture. Nike supported him. We talked about pushback, right, against race. Sponsors play an incredible role because that's where the money is. You talk about owners but sponsors, they take a stand, that will move the needle. And so, what he did, I think it's like, I forget which Olympics it was, but the two US Olympic athletes, Black Olympic athletes who raised their fists. I think it was in Mexico City in '68. Again, a very powerful gesture that will resonate through history, I believe.
Okay, thank you. That was really,
No, I was just going to follow up on that and talk about it in the sense that, and Rosey, you did talk about this already a little bit in the sense of having more diversity in governing structures, but how do leagues, associations, minor leagues or minor associations for young people really, sort of move from that more performative sort of aspect? Because as I think you guys mentioned as well, when the incidents happened in the AHL and the East Coast Hockey League, there was lots of words being put out there that we don't agree with this and all that. But when what can we do to move from performative sort of things where we do certain actions to actual change where that we see the barriers are actually broken down?
Well, I feel like you have to incentivize these leagues and these organizations, most of the amateur sport leagues are funded, all of them in Canada are funded by the government. So they can play a fairly large role in that by showing that they're on the forefront of this, and they are diverse, they include, and it doesn't mean that just because I'm just going to guess here, I don't know, lacrosse is maybe, a particular sport, let's just say a particular sport has predominantly white kids on the team. That doesn't mean that there's an issue with that sport, that organization, that team. Not at all. It's not as if you have to insert, people of color on the team in order to make it more palatable and in order to bring it up to speed with the current racial standards. Not at all. It's about the spirit of sport, the spirit of competition, the spirit of team, the spirit of humanity needs to live in all of these organizations, so that when an individual, a coach, a teammate, or a fan, or an athlete makes some sort of gesture that aims to humiliate, diminish, exclude an individual, everybody goes, nope, not here. That's it. That's it. And so it has to be known, like, maybe every team, we start with the amateur teams. Here we're on the cusp of the Olympic Games, about to start in just about a week. And you've got these incredible athletes who represent these sports. And they're all part of these sport teams that are part of the amateur sport of Canada. They could all have in their statement, we do not discriminate. We welcome everyone. And it could be such a bold statement that it's very difficult to have an individual on the team to make certain racial gestures and then say, what? I don't know. I didn't know. That's fine. I didn't mean that. I mean, it should be just such a bold statement. And I think that you can start with the amateur athletic teams, because they do hold some power, especially around this time of the year when you got the Olympic Games. And then you encourage the pro teams as well, to put that out there, to talk about it, to have discourse. And again, it's not pitting one race against another. It's pitting horrendous behavior and shining a spotlight on it and going, we don't do that. We are of this. We are so pro humanity that this can't live in the light of day. And so it just falls to the wayside, that kind of behavior. So I think that, yeah, you could start with the amateur sport leagues and have them put a disclaimer, and it's very bold. And because a lot of times people go, racism, that's not really an issue. We're not racist. Why should we even bother to talk about it? Well, it's clear that we do still need to talk about it. Until people realize that, again, like I say, it diminishes, it excludes, it's emotionally taxing, it is wrong, and it should not exist. Because really, when you're competing in the sport, it's all about the sport. It's all about getting on that field and giving it 100%. It's not about whether or not I wear a hijab or I have dreads or I have braids. It's about that sport. It's about giving it that effort. That's what really matters. That's what you know, and that's what you remember, and that's what we should be promoting. And so, yeah, we start at the amateur sport level. We really have to engage these owners and say, you guys got to do better from the top. We need the owners out there speaking it. And it might seem performative at first. Oh, well, here goes another billionaire talking about race. But you know what? You don't see them enough. You don't hear from them enough. So get them out there talking about it.
Now, I know we're running out of time, Senator, and I just wanted to I think it's a very good idea to maybe have a few questions to the government about what they're doing. The Minister of Sport to be able to say, what are you doing here? And are you willing to attach certain things to funding to different organizations that need to work on anti-racism and diversity in those areas? So, Senator, I'll go over to you.
No, I think that's a very important question. I'd like to hear an answer to that. What should the government do?
Well, that's a great question. I'm sorry if I sound cynical, but to me, I never look to the government as the first solution to problem. because I live in Ottawa, I don't know, but I think, the government can do its part, but it really gets down to the grassroots, right? And, your local community associations and what what values within communities. I think programs that are at the grassroots level that's where things will change. And yes, we need the big leagues because they do set the examples for all the little kids and their parents, what's appropriate and what's not. But as far as government goes, I'm not familiar with government programs or whatnot, but perhaps you should put some kind of conditions when it does come to funding. I don't mean quotas, don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about, but some kind of mission statement or understanding of the spirit, as Rosey had mentioned, of what sports is all about. The problem I found with sports is not the sport itself, it's all the stuff off the field, usually. It's all the stuff outside when you're not actually engaging in the sport. It's, you talk about team versus individual. I think one of the biggest problems is locker rooms, what goes on in the locker rooms. There's a lot of stuff, that's said, exchanged, and it's supposed to be off limits, right? But a lot of attitudes and whatever are formed, expressed, approved, which you could never do out in public, but it's such a core part of that team. So I find that a bit of a contradiction, to be honest.
Yes, this has been absolutely wonderful, and we are coming close to the end. And I'm going to channel my inner Ted Lasso and look for hope, and if not humor, but at least hope. So I'm taking away a few things from here. What I've heard you both say: start early, start with amateur sports, start with kids and their parents, and make sure that they have the right way of thinking about sports and team and appropriate behavior. Change the leadership at the top, so that those who are making the decisions about rules and procedures understand the impact of their decision, and if they come from an experience of being racialized, they will have another response to proposals that are put forward. I heard Sheema say, look for best practices. I mean, Gary Bettman should look at what the National Basketball League is doing. So maybe we need to, the sports world itself needs to develop a series of templates on best practices that are being followed all over the world. And fourth, very importantly, is follow the money. The owners, the fans, the sponsors, and the government. So I think this has been an absolutely fantastic discussion. Thank you, Sheema and Rosey. Thank you to our listeners. And if you have any questions or suggestions for topics or even speakers, do write to me on Twitter or to my Senate email. I promise we will get back to you, and we would love to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been wonderful.
Thank you for the opportunity.